Our topic for the month is unity and oneness, and the title of my talk is Shalom. Our theme for the whole year actually is spirituality in action. And to me, there's no greater action. There's no better way to do that is in this idea of peace building. Peace building. I've been immersed in this now for some months. Actually, when I think about it, really for years, my whole life. But in a really deep way, a really intentional deep way for just some months. And so I'm learning and I'm passing along the things that I am learning to you, and hope that you take these tools and these ideas and are able to use them in your lives, because I see each and every one of you. Who here feels themselves a peacemaker, a peace builder? Absolutely. We all are in some way or another. So a really important thing is this word peace. What does it mean? You know, it has lots and lots of definitions, and as I was looking for something that could just really sum it up in the best way possible, I came across the word shalom, which means also peace. And it is taken from the root word shalom, which means to be safe in mind, body, or estate. And it has lots and lots of other meanings. And maybe there are folks in here who can corroborate these ideas from me. But number one, the idea of not being at war, security and freedom from violence. That's something that we all think about, peace being, right? Is when we're not at war, people are getting along, then that's peace. But there's actually a lot more to it than that. The idea of serenity and tranquility, also known as the state of oneness or feeling wholeness with the great presence, with the one presence that we call God. That also is being at peace. How many of you can relate to that feeling, right? When we drop down into that meditative place that we sang about earlier, that's a feeling of peace, of inner peace. It's also harmony between people, right? That we all just get along. And I love this as well. See, serenity and tranquility, that's a state of being. But shalom also refers to a call to action. A call to action. To make complete. To heal. To restore. Some of what I was reading, and I saw a couple of videos on this to explain this idea of shalom, is that there are so many moving pieces and parts to life. And what shalom does is kind of bring them all together. You know, and if there is a piece that's missing, if there's a piece that's not right, if there's a piece that's out of alignment, to bring shalom is to bring it together, right? To create wholeness, oneness, restoration. Shalom is also a sense of transcendence, and what one author called the radical union of opposites. The radical union of opposites. Right? Shalom is the word that is said for hello and goodbye. Right? So it is bringing together the opposites. Some people think that this idea of peace building is somehow airy-fairy, some hippy-dippy kind of thing. But I'm telling you, when you're bringing together the radical union of opposites, that is a deep and powerful and courageous work.
Yes.
It also means prosperity and well-being. Isn't that a beautiful word? I just want to use it now all the time. Shalom, it just means there's so much in that one word. And all of those things, to me, are different aspects of peace. Right? Without any of these things, we can't say that we're at peace. Right? Without harmony, without prosperity, without that feeling of oneness, without that restoration and wholeness, there is no peace. There is no peace. So this word to me really just exemplifies what it is to be at peace in all of its different definitions. Oh, and also, I almost forgot that one. To generously repay from overflowing fullness. So to be in shalom is to be so full. Imagine just feeling the wholeness, the fullness of spirit to such a degree that it just overflows. It comes out of you. This beauty, this love, this sense of wholeness and togetherness, that it just comes out of us when we are in that place of peace ourselves, in that place of shalom. I just love it. I love it. And so, if you were here last week, That's for later. I found a couple more quotes that also speak to what it means to be at peace. Dwight Eisenhower said this one: peace and justice are two sides of the same coin. In other words, we can't have peace if there is no justice. If you want peace, then work for justice. That's from Pope John Paul VI. And then Ronald Reagan said this one. Ronald Reagan actually came up quite a few times as I was looking for quotes about peace, which I think is kind of ironic. And you'll understand the context of that as I speak a little bit more this morning. But peace is more than just the absence of war. True peace is justice. True peace is freedom. And true peace dictates the recognition of human rights. Yeah, take that one in. All of these are part of what it means to be peace, and these are the pieces that we need to recognize if we are to be peace builders. And now where I started heading with this. If you were here last week, you know that a few of us, several of us, Donna, Norma, myself, and Patricia, went to the Peace and Justice Memorial Center in Montgomery, Alabama last weekend. Spirituality in Action, Peace, Justice, and Legacy was my talk from last week. And for those of you who weren't here or don't know what this is all about, the Montgomery was the site, was just a huge hub in the slave trade back in the 1600s. Millions and millions of people passed through the port, and it became kind of the holding place where people were sold and auctioned. And the site that we went to where this was one of those places. It was one of those places. So when you drive down the streets, you see, like this is where people were trafficked. It was just there's a heaviness, a sadness, and it was a really, really intense experience for all of us. This was just a little review. If you were here last week, you probably saw that picture. That is the first thing that greets you when you first walk into the memorial, and it's life-size statue of a slave family. And the chains around them actually have rusted, and the rust is dripping down on the statues. It looks like blood. It's just very, very moving and just a difficult thing to experience, just to see it. And then you think, wow, I'm having a hard time just experiencing this. Imagine what it must have been for the people who went through it. Right? My little issues are just that, little issues. These were the monuments that we saw. And if you can imagine, they're about from here, maybe this tall. And they hang at different levels. When you walk into the museum, they're low to the ground. But as you get further along in the monument, they're up higher and higher and higher, till you're at a point where you're looking up and you can see the bottom of these, I don't even know what to call them, pillars. You can see the bottom, and at the bottom of each one is the name of the county where various people were lynched. And then on the front of each one of those monuments is the names of people that were lynched in that particular county. So there are over 4,000 names there, and those were ones that had to be verified very carefully in multiple ways in order to be there. There are lots more that happened, lots more, but these are the ones that could be verified. And so outside there are replicas of what you see inside, and that's part of the monument out there. And you see how they're lined up, looking like coffins, all next to each other. And they're there so that the various counties can come and pick them up or have them delivered and put them in their communities where they belong, right, as a sort of memorial to the people who lost their lives. And that one, I don't know if you can see in the picture, but that's the one from Marion County, Florida. Yeah, Miami-Dade. And there's a church in the background, which I thought was just so appropriate to have that there. And just so you know, there is a group of people in Marion County that right now are already working on this project, right, to be able to bring the monument here. I don't think it's been decided where it's going to be yet. That's things that are still in conversation. And if you're interested in getting involved in any of this, just let me know, and I can direct you to the right people. And this is another part of it actually is not on the same site. It's about a block away or a couple of blocks away. It's within walking distance anyway. And this is called the Legacy Museum. And that was on the outside of the building. Inside, you can't take pictures. So we didn't have pictures to share with you from that experience. And we didn't talk about it a whole lot last time that we were together. So I thought I would go into a little bit more of the history of that and what is actually inside that part of the exhibit. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again.
Amen.
Right? See, these are difficult, ugly conversations. But the reason that we do it is so that we don't live it again.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we do it is that we can see what were the precursors, what happened, and how do we keep such horror from ever happening again to anyone. So part of what they did in that exhibit was to go through the history, right? That and it's in all different ways. Some of it is oh my gosh, they have a section where you're looking in a closed, it's got bars and stuff on the window, and they're holograms of people who were different kind, like women, children, people who were slaves. There's also another exhibit where you can pick up the phone and feel like you're talking to someone who's behind bars in prison. And then there's just little films, there's all kinds of stuff. But anyway, the history, the background of this. If you see, started in 1619. And I'm going to read for you some of the facts that go along with this. So 1619 marks the year when Africans were first brought to the British colonies in Jamestown, Virginia. With the legal status of servants, they were indentured servants. So it wasn't just African Americans that were indentured servants, there were white servants as well. But they could buy their way out of servitude at some point. Then there was a rebellion where it was in the 1680s or something. It was called Bacon's Rebellion. And this gentleman who had issue with someone, one of the leaders in the Commonwealth, I don't know if he was the governor or what it was, but he got together a group of people in an uprising. And so they were all the indentured servants. They were African American, and they were also white indentured servants. And what happened when the powers that be saw these groups coming together, they said, oh, we cannot have this. Right? There's power in numbers. Right? So what they did was they divided them. They sought to divide the people. And the African Americans then became the easy targets. So they gave the other indentured servants a little bit of power, and it was embraced. It was embraced. So the history of the transatlantic slave trade, 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World. 10.7 million actually made it through the Middle Passage. And about 26, a quarter of those people were children. In 1860, 75% of white families actually didn't own slaves, while only 1% owned up to 40 or more, and 1/10 of those owned 100 or more. In 1865, the Emancipation Proclamation and passage of the 13th Amendment freed 4 million slaves in the South. So if you look at the timeline, though, that was 246 years from 1619 till 1865 that we legally had slaves in this country. Millions and millions of people. And that number that I shared with you, the 12 million, was the people that were brought over from Africa. That's not the people that came here and had children themselves. Right? So the number just swelled. It's mind-boggling, really. As Michelle Alexander writes in The New Jim Crow, the notion of white supremacy rationalized the enslavement of Africans, even as whites endeavored to form a new nation based on the ideals of equality, liberty, and justice for all. Under the terms of our country's foundings, slaves were defined as 3/5 of a man and not a real whole human being. So this is part of the legacy. Slavery was abolished in 1865 with the end of the Civil War and the passing of the 13th Amendment. The racial caste in the United States should have ended then as well. However, the idea of race as a marker of value continued, and after Reconstruction, the majority of whites during the time believed that the newly freed African Americans were too lazy to work, which surged legislators to pass what was called the Black Codes. How many of you have heard of this? Black Codes. This is something I don't remember learning when I was in school. This was essentially a system of control. The codes varied from state to state, but were rooted from slavery, and they foreshadowed the Jim Crow laws to come. So these codes were passed, and they restricted the freedom of the African Americans. Even though they were technically free, it restricted their freedom to own property, to conduct business, to buy and lease land, and to move freely through public spaces. So people would be prosecuted for vagrancy if they weren't working, or if they looked at someone the wrong way, or they didn't speak to someone with the right tone, that they could be actually arrested for this. The 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment prohibiting states from denying citizens due process and equal protection of law, and the 15th Amendment providing that the right to vote should not be denied on account of race. With the passage of these legislations and the protection of federal troops, black advancements started to take place. African Americans began to vote in larger numbers, to gain political power, and even to seize control of their own destinies by growing toward greater social and economic equality. However, as W.E.B. Du Bois writes in Reconstruction and Its Benefits, the slave went free, stood for a brief moment in the sun, and then moved right back to slavery, when a rapid and severe backlash of their progress occurred, and many white Southerners swore to redeem the South. So with the help of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan, and their violent campaign of terror, federal troops retreated, and African Americans once again found themselves stuck in this abyss. So here we have Jim Crow laws, again, legally enforced racial segregation from 1877 until the 1950s. It's a lot of years, people. It's a lot of years. From 1881 to 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred. Again, these are the ones that actually can be corroborated, either because there was things written about it, but it had to be corroborated in multiple ways. Of the people that were lynched, 70-something percent, 3/4 of them, 72.7 were black. Again, history seemed to be repeating itself in vagrancy laws where mischief and insulting gestures were crimes enforced disproportionately against blacks. Aggressive enforcement of these criminal offenses birthed convict leasing, which in turn helped to rebuild the South and supplied labor for farming, railroads, mining, and logging. Now, how many of you have heard of that, convict leasing? Another interesting idea. During convict leasing, prisoners were contracted under the legal status of laborers and were sold to the highest bidder. Slavery, by another named author, Douglas Blackman, points out that African Americans were arrested by the thousands during this period. Described that African Americans were then tackled with court costs and fines that they had no means of paying off, and so they were sold into forced labor. Most importantly, convicts had no concrete legal rights. They were understood to be slaves. You see, because while the 13th Amendment did abolish slavery, it allowed for an exception. Slavery remained appropriate as punishment for a crime. So we no longer had legal slavery, but if you committed a crime, you could then be considered a slave. So it was just a way that people worked around the system. During convict leasing, incarceration grew 10 times faster than the general population, and prisoners became younger and blacker, and the length of their sentences soared. So then convict leasing ends, right? Although it ended, the criminal justice system then was strategically employed to enforce African Americans back into this system of repression and control. So Jim Crow was thriving, and the idea of race inferiority remained. For another 100 years, black people were segregated, denied the right to vote, and stripped of their dignity. Nevertheless, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s helped to end legal racial segregation, but racial bias persevered. Today, a dark cloud of guilt is disproportionately assigned to many people of color who are arrested, convicted of crimes, and sent to prison, with many black people being considered guilty until proven innocent. And here's the latest manifestation of it. The lifetime likelihood of imprisonment. And if you see the numbers, for all men, the likelihood of a man in America ending up in prison is 1 in 9, of just men in general. For white men, the number is 1 in 17. However, for black men, the number is 1 in 3. Can you imagine that a third of African American men, people born right here, right now, have the likelihood of ending up in prison? Latino men, it's 1 in 6. The numbers for women overall, 1 in 56, white women 1 in 111, and black women 1 in 18. Latin women 1 in 45. Oh, is there one missing? That one is missing. Yes. Mass incarceration. So we went from convict leasing to the war on drugs, which was launched in 1971, and that's why I said it was so interesting that Ronald Reagan was the one speaking on peace, because that's where a lot of this started. Look at how it skyrockets. And you see the United States, these are present numbers. The United States has 5% of the world's population, yet we have 25% of the world's incarcerated people. Are we that bad? Are we that bad here in the U.S.? Do we have that many bad people?
Yeah.
I just don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second. Yes, and then we throw in prisons for profit, and that's another whole, that will take us in a whole other talk. So just breathe in, breathe in. This is where we are. This is where we are, and it's an awful, really difficult conversation to have. But as I shared with you all last week, as I looked at all of this and thought, number one, why in the heck? Why do we want to have a memorial to this horrible thing, to this lynching? A whole museum dedicated to that. I know as a metaphysician that where I put my attention, where I focus, grows.
Absolutely.
So do we want to grow that? Why do we keep going back to that? Well, the problem is, as you see, it has never really changed. It has never changed. Though the laws have changed, the ideas behind it have never changed. They remain the same. And it remains a wound. It's a wound in our national history, and we see it. We see it. We are seeing it played out in front of our eyes. That there has been no return to wholeness. There's been no reconciliation. We've not been having the conversations that we need to have around this. And I'm really proud of this community. As I showed this last week and shared with you that there was a conversation happening at CF on Wednesday. How many of you went to that? I know there were a couple of people in our congregation that were there. And what I loved most about it, I loved a few things, but one was that Reverend Peggy Hostetler, who was the minister here at the center, spearheaded this whole movement. And when the Bridges group started working on this about 3 years ago, it was kind of small and there was some infighting, and it was just like, it didn't look like it was going to amount to much of anything. Well, there were over 200 people that showed up at CF on Wednesday to have these conversations. And they did different skits. They did a skit of a biracial couple or a black and white couple walking down the street and young people saying things, and so what would you do? Another one of the skits was to have the two different families speaking, a white family, father and son, a black family, father and son, talking about that first time you get out in the car and driving and what kinds of things you have to be careful about. And those conversations are very, very different in white families and black families.
Absolutely.
right? So we had 200 people in this room. We were all sitting at different tables. Everyone just kind of randomly picked a number. And so we got to sit at tables with people of different races and different ages and all different backgrounds and talk about these topics. And it was awesome. It was awesome. People were excited, and when are we going to do this again? So I'm encouraged, and also to know that there are people here in Marion County that are working to bring a monument back here. So the conversations are starting to happen. Creating a world that works for everyone. That's our vision with Centers for Spiritual Living. That's what we're about. How do we do that? Or how do we do that in light of the ugliness of some of what we're seeing? And I detoured a little bit. So I said I personally had a little issue with why we have these monuments, right? Why? And what I realized in being there was just the importance of recognizing where we are. Mm-hmm. And there was this really truly happened to me. I plugged in the address to our hotel in my phone, and I got a new phone, so I hadn't set it up so that my phone could figure out where I was. Right? You know, you have to put that, like allow your phone to find where you are. So I plugged in the address to the hotel, and I'm waiting like, okay, so is it going to tell me how to get there? Well, it couldn't tell me because it didn't know where I was. Right? There's lots of ways to get where you're going, but if you don't know where you're starting from, how do you get there? Right? So it's the same, it is the same idea. We have to understand where we are so that we can get a better clue of how to get where we want to go. That's why it's important. That's why we need to know. And aside from the fact that we need to treat this gaping wound in our country. So, creating a world that works for everyone. What can we do? What can you and I do? Number one, I say be a possibilitarian. Right? There are lots of people out there that will tell you every reason why things can't happen. How impossible it is, right? But we are here to hold the truth and to speak the truth and be that possibility and show that possibility and speak it everywhere you go. Yes, peace is possible. Yes, absolutely, peace is possible.
Yeah, Cindy,
yes.
I want to say something. We talked about peace. What happened to me yesterday? Yesterday morning I got up. I said I want to go have my feet taken care of. Pedicure. So I went to a new place here on 27, right here in Ocala. Had my feet taken care of. Walking out the parking lot, beautiful day. Caucasian guy come by, bam, hits me with the car. So I jumped on top of the car to keep him from really ran over me. So I jumped off the car, a Caucasian lady and a daughter about 10. They ran over to me and they grabbed me and they says, "Are you okay?" You know what this guy did? This guy rolled up his window and was saying all these crazy prejudiced words. It was crazy. And we couldn't get his license plate. All I know is this guy, and she said too, it's like maybe in his 40s or 50s. He tried to kill me. But what did I do to him? You talking about, so where we gotta go? We got some problems here now, you know?
Yeah, you do. Wow, that's rich.
Yeah. You know?
But you are here and well.
But he is here and well, and let's be grateful for that, yes? Creating a world that works for everyone.
Yeah.
We create the possibility, we speak peace, we be peace. Educate yourself. In the short time that I have taken to educate myself about this, I've learned so much. Just so much. Take the time to understand, why are people taking a knee? If that offends you, dive into it. Right? Try to understand what is happening and engage other people's opinions. It's not easy to hear. It's not easy to hear, but it's okay. It's okay.
You know something? You will never, nobody in here, unless you're of color, know what it's like to live in America and being a black man or a man of color,
Person.
trying to live in this in this country.
Absolutely. Every day.
Every day.
Every day. Every day you feel it.
You face
know
it. So
yeah. Every day.
it's
Right there.
you don't know what we go through with. The little things that happen.
Yeah. Most people would just pass it off, but we feel it.
It's not,
Sure.
we got some ways to go.
Yes, we do. And much progress has been made.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge that much
We
progress
do.
has been made, but there is much more to do. There's much more to do. Go ahead, Donna.
I just want to point out one thing, and a lot of people don't even mention this. And I'm an immigrant, so I came into and stepped into this ugliness that was just foreign to me. Because in Jamaica, we mix the races. It's not a big deal. But I recognize, and I'm so grateful for all my Caucasian friends who step up and stand.
Yeah.
And up stand. Because just like that woman came to your age, I can't tell you how many of my friends stand in front of me and protect me and my wife as a gay black woman. I tell people, I dare you say nothing to me. I have a whole herd of my white friends who will knock you down to protect me and my family. And I just wanted to point that out. There's none of us that are part of this tribe, so I'm just so grateful for that.
Yes.
We love you, Donna.
You love me.
So educate yourself, engage other opinions, be willing to lean into the conversation.
Yes.
These are not easy conversations to have. They're not. But the thing that I'm learning also about peace building is that a huge part of peace building is just showing up.
Amen.
And being willing,
Amen.
having the courage
Amen.
to lean into the difficulty of the conversation.
Amen.
I found a little piece. I thought it was funny. I'm going to share it with you. It was someone asking about this idea of white privilege that I know is just so offensive for so many people. But I think he did it in a humorous way. It's a comedian who's answering this question. And his name is Omar Ismail, and maybe some of you have seen it. This thing came out last year, or 2 years ago. So somebody writes or asks the question, says, I'm white. That's all you know about me. Am I privileged based on that alone? And assuming that I am, should I feel guilt, and what should I do about it? So that's the question, right? Here's his answer. Now remember, he's a comedian, so I'm just going to read it like he says it. Okay, his answer is absolutely. Consider it this way. All I know about you is that you're tall. Does that mean you have advantages? Well, yes. Does that mean that you don't deserve the can of tuna that's on the higher shelf? No, nobody's saying that. Eat away, mighty giant. Should you feel guilty about getting the tuna from the top shelf? No, nobody's saying that either. Lighten your soul's burden and let it fly free in the clouds beneath your knees. He says, does that mean that short people can't get tuna? No. Does that mean there aren't disadvantages to being tall? It doesn't mean that either. Nobody's saying that. You have our sympathy for your poor bruised knees. What people are saying is, number one, denying you are lucky is silly. Number two, stop looking bewildered every time a short person can't reach something. We're sick of explaining this incredibly simple concept. Number three, we know there are things you don't have. For example, even higher shelves. We know, number four, we know there may be other things that are preventing you from reaching those high shelves. Maybe you have bad elbows, or maybe you have arthritis. Short people with arthritis are still below you, and you're still lucky that you're tall. Number five, it works out well for most people for the grocery store to put most things on the medium shelves.
Absolutely.
And number six, if you can help shorter people with the things on the higher shelves, do so. Why wouldn't you do that? Short people can help you get the stuff that's down on the lower shelves. Number seven, we're annoyed that the people who run the grocery store put all the best stuff on the top shelves. Number eight, there are a lot of people who are putting things on higher shelves because they hate short people. Don't associate with those folks. Because they want everything to be about this height.
Oh.
That was in the picture that he showed, so I'm just sharing that with you. Number 9, let's see. Same idea with whiteness. There are advantages. It doesn't mean you're rich. It doesn't mean you're luckier than a lucky black guy. Nobody wants you to be crippled with guilt. Nobody has ever wanted those things or means those things. Number 10, it just means you have an advantage, and all that anyone is asking is that you get it. And once you get it, it's pretty straightforward to all the other further implications. So I thought that was a great analogy. A great analogy. You'll think about it now when you go to the grocery store, right? All you tall people who can reach the top shelves. So be willing to lean into the discomfort of the conversation. The next thing, be a courageous stand for peace, justice, and compassion. Right? Yeah. We don't think about it. I mean, I don't often think about the kind of courage that it takes to stand up when we see injustice, when we see someone being mistreated. To be the one that stands out from the crowd and says, that's not right, that takes a lot. It takes a lot, especially when it's your people or it's your family, you know, your group. To be able to stand out and say, no, I'm a stand for kindness, I'm a stand for compassion, it takes a lot. It takes a lot. But know that you are not alone. And then the last thing, confront your own racism.
Amen.
Confront your own racism. And you can't be in this country, you can't be in the United States without having some of it rub off on you.
Absolutely.
In some way. We all have it. I don't care what color you are. We all, because it's just socialized. It's part of the fabric. It's part of the fabric. I'll share my own story. So people a lot of times don't know, you know, they look at me and they, is she half black? Is she half white? Is she Latina? I mean, I've seen people like taking bets almost. They don't seem to know what box to put me in. And it's been like this since I was a little kid, you know. I was always like the only one. So just, you know, for the record, my parents were born in Puerto Rico. And I used to say, when people would ask, I'm Puerto Rican, till I went to Puerto Rico and they said, no, honey, you're not Puerto Rican, you're American. I'm like, damn, well, you know, what am I? Nobody wants me. You know, so here I am. That actually is in Puerto Rico, with my little fro and my brown skin and my big thighs. And this is my family here. That's my grandfather. There's this gentleman here, my grandmother, and they had 15 kids altogether, 13 that grew to adulthood, and I think that's 10 of the siblings. So my grandmother, you see, she was real fair complexion. My grandfather was darker, and when they got together, her family disowned her for being with a dark man. You know? So it was something. It was a stigma that was always in our family. As we spoke, you know, we were talking last week. Norma was mentioned like, why do we bring this stuff up? You know, it's so painful. And let's not bring it up just for the sake of saying it, because if we're not going to follow it up with some kind of action, then don't bother, right?
Amen.
You didn't say it like that, but that's basically the point, right? And then she brought up how when Roots came out, how many of you were around when Roots came out? Do you remember that? Yeah, and how difficult it was being in the South, being here in Ocala when that movie came out. Now, my recollection of it, I was in New York City at the time. And for me, my recollection of Roots, number one, was just watching, just the horror of it. But I didn't feel a personal connection. It wasn't like those were my people. I didn't have that. That wasn't part of my legacy. But what was part of that was the incessant teasing that I got. Not so much from people outside, but within my own family. Within my own family. You see, in Latin culture and in some black cultures and island culture, the lighter you are, the better.
Brown.
Right? Right? Because you can pass.
Yeah.
So you want to have good hair, not bad hair.
Yeah.
My hair, my kinky curly hair, that's considered bad hair. They call it pelo malo. Right? So I was born with my dark skin, my curly hair, and I was told by my family, no man will ever love you. No man. Oh, you'll be lucky. Maybe the Jamaican boy next door will love you because of your dark skin and your kinky hair and your thick thighs. And so I'm, 12, 13 years old. It's all about the boys. And all I could think was how less than I was. Right? Just because of the color of my skin and my hair. And I did everything I could to straighten it, to stay out of the sun, to slather myself with bleach. Bleach. Some people bleach their skin. I mean, it's crazy the things we do, right? As a kid. And then at some point, there was an understanding or a reckoning, like, have I bought into this idea that some people are less? There was nothing wrong with the black Jamaican boy next door. He was a sweet kid. I would have been lucky for him to want to go out with me. I didn't see it at the time. I didn't feel that because I bought into the lie, to the nonsense that there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow inferior to my blonde-haired, blue-eyed friends in school because of my complexion.
That's prevalent to this day in families right now. Within my family, the same thing. The lighter you are, the better you are. You know that old saying, if you're white, you're right. If you're brown, step
You want to
down.
pass
If
the
you're
mic?
black, step back.
Go ahead, share that, because I'm not sure everybody heard that.
It is very much to this day in my family, the same thing. And then when I married an East Indian, and that whole thing was, oh my God, she wanted him to marry white or Asian, but black, no way. And in Jamaica, so you're Jamaican, I was considered the brownie. And in my family, my black American family right here, right now, the lighter you are, the better you're treated.
That's right. Don't bring home anybody blacker than you.
Yes,
Can anyone hear?
if you're white, you're right. If you're brown, stick around. And if you're black, step back. That's how it is. To this day.
And what I've heard, the phrase I've heard, don't bring home anybody blacker than you. Folks, I know it is hard to hear, but this is the reality. And we need to address this within our own families, within our own races. Right? There was a young woman with us that went on the trip who is African American, and she's formerly incarcerated. And she said going to this museum and understanding the background, the history, like all of that together, was ironically enough actually very freeing for her. Because as she looked at her life and she looked at the things that she went through, suddenly it was like, wow, there was nothing inherently wrong with me. I just had the misfortune, or not misfortune, but happened to, however you want to put it, to have been born in this time, in this place, in this body, in this skin, and that's just what it is. And now we can look at it. Now we can look at that and do what we can to address these systems. Right? And it's not just African Americans, we know that too, right? I mean, the same conversation could be had about Native Americans. And when you go into other places, it's other folks. It feels very personal, for us because we are here. But this is things that people are dealing with all over the world. All over the world. And when you get down to it, the first place and the most important place to make the change is within yourself.
Amen.
It's within your heart. Right? It was my understanding for myself. There is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with me. Look, I mean, people pay to get a tan. People pay to get their hair curled like mine. I don't have to pay for that. I can wear my hair curly. I can wear it straight. You know what? And guess what? I found my man. And he loves me with all my flaws. So there you go, right? Progress, folks. Nelson Mandela said this: peace is not the absence of conflict. Wow, how many people thought that? Peace means that we don't have conflict anymore. Wrong. We will always have conflict. We need conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing. It's how we manage the conflict. It's how we manage the conflict. It's the respect and the dignity that we offer others that happen to disagree with our opinion. It's how we come to higher resolution. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the creation of an environment where all can flourish, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, gender, class, caste, or any other social markers of difference. Ooh, and then John F. Kennedy said this: every thoughtful citizen who despairs of war and wishes to bring peace should begin by looking inward, by examining his own attitudes toward the possibility of peace. First, examine our attitudes toward peace itself. Too many of us think it's impossible. Too many think it's unreal. But that is a dangerous and defeatist belief.
Amen.
It leads to the conclusion that war is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, and that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. So our first step, right? We look within and we see the possibility of peace, and we live the possibility of peace, and we be the possibilitarians. I'm thinking John F. Kennedy could have been a New Thought guy.
Yeah.
He goes on to say this: we need not accept that dismal view, right? That dangerous defeatist attitude. Our problems are man-made.
Amen.
Right? We are not born hating.
Yes.
We're not born thinking people are less than. I look at my grandsons, they love everybody. They love everybody. If you're nice to them, they're nice to you. Our problems are man-made. Since our problems are man-made, they can be solved by man. And man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again.
Yes.
This is the man who said, we're going to put people on the moon. And he didn't want to hear, it's not going to happen. He wanted to just tell me how it's going to be done. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. So we can claim, let us just claim, let's claim it, that we are creating peace, that we are living peace, that we are the possibility of oneness and wholeness and restoration. In fact, it's not a possibility, it's the truth. That is the truth of who we are. And anything that is not that is not the truth. It's the illusion. It is the illusion. So I just call out to each and every one of you, the folks of you that are here, the people that are watching, to know that truth for yourself, to hold that possibility and to speak it, and to speak it, and to be bold in your courage, and to be bold in your peacefulness.
Being is more important than doing.
Yes. Thank you, sweetie. Being is more important than doing. Be your kind, beautiful, bright selves. And you'll make the change.
Absolutely.
We will make that change together.